Hello, my name is Charlie Caruso and I'm back again with a vlog after I had a pretty meaty conversation with Dahi from Flux. And I've learnt my lesson. I think 2.4 hours or however much it was is too long. And so I'm going to try to be clever with the calls I've got this week and try to make them in small sections. And I hope to be speaking with, I think I've got roughly 5 interviews lined up. Some of them are representatives of smaller parties and many of whom I think I'd imagine tick a lot of boxes, especially things like ICAC and real commitment to reform, political donation reform, and those sort of topics that I certainly have been quite vocal on Twitter, which is great. So I look forward to those. But today I wanted to do a piece quickly on the Republic. So I can't actually remember the dates. I should have done some more research on the exact dates, but I know that we've had this conversation as a country and largely we opted to stay how we were. Coming into 2022, what I certainly don't want to see any parties coming to the table or coming to that election saying, well, we're going to vote a republic. That's what we're for. Because even if a lot of Australians support that idea, I'd like to think we might have learned a few lessons at least from Brexit and to another extent in Scotland, where the vote yes or no to separate from the UK. I take from those 2 instances that you should never simplify or make it a yes and no question when actually the nuances of execution are really complex. So, for example, with the Republic, yeah, it's a great idea if we make the position that when the Queen either abdicates or passes away, when she's no longer head of state in the UK, that at that point, instead of reappointing the monarchy, the British monarchy as our head of state, at that point before the coronation of Charles, that we would decide there and then we would commence the proceedings for becoming a republic and having an Australian head of state. So in theory, I support that. However, there's a lot of decisions that need to be made before that would happen. And I've been listening to the audiobook of Malcolm Turnbull, and he was obviously very publicly known to be supporting the Republic, but having a better understanding of why it fell over or what they struggled with indicates to me it was like, well, he spells it out. It was because they struggled very much with the powers that were going to be potentially granted to a president, how that president was going to be elected. And there were 2 schools of thought largely. It was the parliament were to elect, and I believe Turnbull put forward that if the people would choose the nominations and the nominees by vote and at a local level, and then the nominees would then go to Parliament to make the final decision. So that was one option. And then the other option was that obviously the people would vote that completely themselves. Or it could be that the Parliament themselves went through that entire nomination and candidate search and made that selection themselves, entirely up to them. I think there's pros and cons for all. I like the idea of having an Australian head of state that the people chose. But then that's just me. And I think that's a really important debate. If we even want to think about having a republic when the Queen's time does come on, then we also need to think, okay, well, the argument was laid out for us that at the cost, right? The cost of replacing the head of state, that we've got to change all our coins and all our currency. Frankly, that's likely to happen anyway if we have a head of state change. We're going to have to change all the coins to Charles anyway. So let's actually see the numbers. How much is it actually going to cost? Okay, Constitution. Let's have it really clear. What is going to, are we getting rid of the Constitution? This is an opportunity to improve our Constitution. If that is the case, how are you going to improve that Constitution? This is a really complex, complex issue. And so I ask any political party, small or large, that are having that as a policy position, please have some thought and rigor behind making this position into 2022, because I know majority of people will think, oh, that's a great idea or it's a bad idea. But the thought process around how is that going to offer an opportunity to amend the Constitution? If so, what are we aiming to amend? What are we going to keep in? How is the president, if we're even going to have a president, we're going to have a different title for them. What is their role? And I wanted to bring this up because I think this is an opportunity for us to improve the way our political system works. And hear me out here. So listening to Turnbull in his book, he describes the insane schedule once he became PM. And let me just read this out to you. 12th of November, Jakarta. 13th of November, Berlin. Arrival in Antalya for the G20 on the 14th. Departure for Manila for APEC on the 16th. 2 days in Manila. Day return to Australia for a visit to Darwin on the 20th of November, then to Kuala Lumpur for the East Asia Summit for the 21st and the 22nd. Back in Canberra for 6 a.m. for Parliament on Monday the 23rd, where he stayed for 4 days in Parliament, then evening flight on the 26th for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, which is CHOGM in Malta. 2 days there, before flying Sunday 29th to Paris for the climate conference, leaving the following night, Monday the 30th, to arrive back in Canberra 6:15 a.m. on the 2nd of December, right? So what I deduce is that these enormous amount of responsibilities to represent Australia in a practical sense is taking our key decision maker away from Australia and away from, important policy conversations that he could be having with his ministers, because there is an equal role that he has to play as being our figurehead and being our representative, both really critically important roles. The question I pose to everyone that's watching is, how could the president, or whatever we want to call them, because there's an opportunity for us to do that differently, right? Let's call them the chairman, because most people are pretty comfortable with how a public listed company or a big company has a board and a chairman of the board and the CEO in the corporate exec, and basically the CEO and the executive management team, and they're about running the company, and they report to the board, who are the representatives of the people. So just keep that in mind. We're very comfortable with that governance system. So I ask, could we have a greater depth of conversation around, could the president or the chairperson act much like a chairman or a chairwoman? And and which role do we want to be internationally represented? So let's say if we made the president the one that goes and does this insane international schedule, and is sort of going around the world and advocating on behalf and representing Australia as that role, but largely allowing the Prime Minister to get on with their day-to-day and actually run the country. If we have that kind of role, and that president isn't involved in the day-to-day, but the Prime Minister reports to the president and reports on everything that is going on and how they're progressing, the idea that we would allow the Parliament to vote that president in becomes more and more unsettling, because if we put that overlay in a public companies setting, that would be saying the CEO is choosing the chairperson, which doesn't make sense. Excuse me. Or it doesn't make as much sense from a good governance perspective. So for me, it feels a lot more, it sort of passed a bit more of a pub test, the idea that our president, if they are holding our PM accountable and are representing us on an international stage, that we, the people, nominate and select, almost in a complementary voting system. So we vote for the lower house and the upper house, and we vote for the president, and that is, it's a dual voting system, so it happens concurrently. That sort of makes me feel like that makes a lot more sense, and I'm hoping that someone watching might have seen a massive flaw or error in my logic, and I hope someone could put their hand out and have this conversation with me at a later time, because it's something that I really want to understand and better interpret and question. But it makes sense to me, if we were going to do that, then that could potentially alleviate a lot of stress and time and distractions away from the Prime Minister, who could by and large get on with the function of making sure we're passing the best policy, that we're negotiating, that we're, you know, that we're really doing as much as we can to make sure that whoever is in power is passing the optimum, well, thoroughly researched policies, communicating that well back to the Australian public, really is being that public servant. And I think we have to have that conversation around what is it that we expect you know, ministers and representatives to do, because it's a really full-on job, and we easily bag them and we'll easily say that they're for their own self-interest, and there's definitely probably truth in that somewhere, but it's a really tough job. It's so much traveling. You really do sacrifice so much personally to be a representative, especially in a country as big as ours physically. And with having Canberra being that focal, if you're in, say, rural Western Australia, there's flights to Perth before there's even flights to Canberra. I'm not sure there's that many direct flights from Perth to Canberra even, and I imagine it'd be the same for the Territory, Northern Territory. So the ability to just get over to where you need, and then when you come back, it's not like a FIFO deal where you're back with your family for 2 weeks. You're actually then representing your local electorate. It's really, really tough. So imagine that as Prime Minister, where you're going internationally as a figurehead. Equally, you're managing and trying to manage the country. Where is your ability to come back to your local electorate and represent them at a federal level? It's near most impossible. So I think that the Republic debate lends us to think more deeply around, could this be an opportunity for us to increase the efficiency and the effectiveness of the role of the Prime Minister, instead of just looking about what powers does this president going to have. Look at it as what roles or functions can it take from the Prime Minister to improve the Prime Minister's function for us as a country. So I just wanted to leave that with you all as something to think about. Please put through your comments in YouTube. Please let me know where I've got something wrong, or if you would like to contribute. I'm not expecting people to come on to contribute because they've spent, 20 years of their lives solidly studying that, albeit that would be nice too. Just everyday Australians. I'm an everyday Australian. I've got no authority to speak on this, but I'm speaking on it because it's a kind of conversation, or it is a conversation that I'm certain that we should all be having together, instead of just blanketly supporting, a policy about we support a republic and we'll bring it in. That infers there's a lot of big decisions, and we all need to be talking about this. And I also encourage, as I said before, all of those, any party that is claiming to make that statement that we're going to become a republic, to actually support that with some rigorous thinking around, okay, well then how is that president going to be appointed? What is their role? What is their function? What are they going to do? How is that going to impact the rest of the governance system? Because these are, and how is the constitution going to be affected and impacted? And how do you see that happening? And what changes would you bring in that instance? They're the nitty gritty important reality of making that nice little statement at the top. So that's the kind of conversations I hope we're starting to think about, because a republic might sound nice or not to people, but there is, I think, an opportunity to improve our system by making that choice, providing we think about it thoroughly and there's some evidence to support it, and not just a blanket throwaway. So there's my bit for today. And hopefully this is useful, and share it please if it is, or if you know anyone that's passionate about this topic, because I'd love to speak with them. Cheers.